Hello and welcome to Soccer 101. My name is Daryl Grove, and sitting across the table from me, it's the inventor of the Taylor turn. His name is Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello.
The lesser-known term.
Yeah, it's the one where you try to do the Cruyff turn, but instead fall over and embarrass yourself.
That's the one.
I pull that off routinely.
That's the one. Luckily, Taylor's going to be here. We're not here to talk about Taylor. We're here to talk about...
I'm out of here.
Johan Cruyff.
What if you tricked me, if you tricked me getting here by, we're just going to talk about your experience in soccer, and now I have to on the fly talk about Johan Cruyff.
Well, luckily you've done all this Cruyff research and watching. Mm-hmm. Let's start with how we pronouncing his name. I know Dutch people like to pronounce
Cruyff.
Yeah. We don't have the mouth shape to do that correctly, I don't think.
Johan Cruyff.
We're going to go Cruyff, even though we know there's a different way of doing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's also, I think unless you have the lived-in experience of, and even then it can be difficult. I lived in Istanbul, but they all call it Istanbul.
Yeah.
But then you end up being that person who's like Barcelona, and I don't really want to be that person, especially if I've never been to Barcelona.
And we'll be talking about Barcelona.
We will. And I've never met Johan Cruyff. So, yeah, I will just call him Johan Cruyff.
So today we're going to be making the argument that Johan Cruyff, which is how I'm pronouncing it from now on, he may be the best player of all time. But so might Pelé, so might George Best, so might Maradona. But the thing you can really...
Will Griggs.
Also, Steve Ball.
Yeah.
The thing you can really make the claim about with Johan Cruyff is that he changed soccer more than any other person. He has influenced the way that soccer is played today more than any other figure, both as a player and then later as a coach.
So I would agree with that. Should we talk about like just for people who are maybe my mom maybe knows who Johan Cruyff is, but doesn't really know who he is. If that makes sense.
So let's think the absolute basics. Dutch footballer, played in the 60s and 70s and a little bit into the 80s. Played mostly for Ajax in the Netherlands, won the European Cup multiple times, played for Barcelona, had great success at Barcelona, played in the NASL for the Aztecs and then the Diplomats. One brief spell with the rival Ajax team.
We'll talk about that.
With Feyenoord. Yeah, that's a fascinating story, I think. And then for the Dutch national team, he took them all the way, kind of an unheard of, who's this Netherlands team? Went all the way to the World Cup final in 1974 and somewhat tragically lost.
Yes.
It's a big moment in Dutch football, the fact that they lost that game to West Germany.
That's all fair to say. But then I think we've got Ballon d'Or winner 3 times, as you said, wins the European Championship with Ajax 3 times in a row.
Yep.
With Barcelona as a manager, has a lot of success. As a manager with Ajax, has a lot of success. Then has the health issues that sort of remove him, and I think that's also part of it, is that he doesn't really burn out as much or fade away. It's just sort of is he's not around anymore, which allows his legacy to endure a bit more.
So let's talk about his legacy.
Sure.
How Johan Cruyff changed soccer. I want to start with the Cruyff turn.
Okay.
It is a move that never existed, at least in the popular imagination, before Johan Cruyff performed it at the 1974 World Cup. There is famous footage of Cruyff performing this turn when he's up against a Swedish defender, Olsen. And Olsen just goes in he really plays a big part in popularising this by going in completely the wrong direction as Cruyff turns and goes down the line and crosses.
Yeah, in terms of being the person who's posterized, he does a great job of being posterized.
Is he maybe the most posterized person in soccer?
It's up there.
And just in case you don't know, the Cruyff turn is a thing that any kid will learn now. I'm a defender. I'm mostly a head it and kick it away defender. I can do a Cruyff turn because it's something that is really effective and easy to do simply, but not easy to do well.
I have an unanswerable question for you, but I'd like your opinion, because it's something you kind of alluded to there. Do you feel I always have this question with moves. Do you feel like he is the first person to really do that enough that it became his move? Or do you think he literally is the first person to just be I'll try this thing?
I think he's the first person to do it in a globally televised event.
Okay,
I'm sure someone else did it sometime else.
I think I ask
you know
because I do.
I'll bet he did it probably previous to that moment in the 74 World Cup. I'm sure he did it for Ajax. I wouldn't be surprised if he did it earlier in that World Cup, but maybe just not as flashily. Because again, I think Olsen's reaction and his biting so hard really sells it and makes it famous.
Yeah, I agree with that. And and then there's the simplicity of it, because it's almost like this very quick, efficient movement that completely changes direction, and if it's done well, does not change the direction of the defender. But you're essentially, if you're facing facing one way, if I'm facing Daryl right now, it's using, like, for me, it'd be my right foot to sort of the inside of my right foot to drag the ball back underneath me and then change direction at the same time. Yeah.
And you swivel and you're in the correct direction.
Right.
Yeah.
And the
why
reason
is it so effective?
It's so effective, I think, because it's very simple, but you can disguise it very easily because you can be like, oh, I'm shaping to cross the ball and then I'm cutting it back, but the defender might try to block it. But it's also because you're not sort of, the ball's not out in front. It's not me versus you and then I do the Cruyff turn. It can be, but that's not when it's most effective. It's usually when you have the defender running alongside you and then you change direction really quickly. And so it's essentially a more fancy cut, which I think is the most effective move in soccer, is just cutting the ball.
Should it be the Cruyff cut?
Probably.
Yeah.
But he turns his body, so it works well.
It has alliteration as well. Maybe we should start a campaign to rebrand the Cruyff turn.
I like that. But I don't want to do that because then it becomes not like a fabric in my soccer DNA.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is I don't know if it's really simple because it's like one of the first moves I learned how to do and now I can do it really well. But I think it is the case that if you're even sort of new to soccer, it's the type of skill move that practice it once or twice and you can probably do it. And then pretty quickly it becomes part of your just kind of dribbling DNA.
And I think it also makes you feel good that you can pull off this move that's actually quite simple to execute. I think the genius is the simplicity of it. And you said the word efficiency earlier, right? If you think of like a step over move, like where you step one way over the ball but then go the other way, you've spent time going in the direction that you're not ultimately planning to go in, right? Whereas the Cruyff turn, you're faking like the ball's going in one direction, but your body never has to commit to that direction. You're always committing to the other direction.
Yes.
That's the efficiency and the simplicity of it.
And with that in mind,
the Cruyff turn.
Can we sort of move on from the Cruyff turn?
Of course, we're going to,
Because I think it's also like the other reason why the Cruyff turn is so big, but also connects with like how Johan Cruyff changed like soccer as we know it, is that like it is sort of a good representation of total football in some ways, or like Cruyff's idea of it, that it's like simplicity of movement, but still a little bit of flair and skill, but then serves to sort of change the direction of the attack, but then you can either pass the ball or shoot the ball or get rid of it. It's not, then you go on a slaloming dribble and then you find your teammate.
So you said the magic words. One of the other major ways Johan Cruyff changed soccer, he is, I'm going to say, the co-author of total football, which is a thing that a lot of people have heard of, right?
And I would say just up front that like a lot of people have heard of, a lot of people have talked about, a lot of people have written books about it, and there
a lot of people don't know what it is.
True, but there is like a lot of nuance around it, and I'm just going to say we're going to do our best to not concern ourselves with the nuance of like, well, it was actually this that inspired that. It's more of a like, let's just talk about the basics of it, shall we?
Okay, I'll give you the basics then.
Cool.
The basic concept is that instead of fixed positions and straight lines, like a line of 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, 2 strikers, the right winger stays on the right wing and runs up and down the right wing. Total football means players can move into each other's spaces and rotate positions, confusing the opposition and opening up space.
Yes.
The key thing here, though, is that it's not as if you just do this like and change position throughout the game. You eventually get back into your original position. Right? If you're a right back, you at some point get back to right back. But it means you can step into midfield and then the left winger is like, do I go with him? Do I not?
Yeah.
You confuse the opposition by rotating positions.
And this is where like I really... One of the things about like doing Soccer 101, doing the show we do, is I really like learning more about it because I have these ideas of like, oh, it's like chaos, that anybody can rotate anywhere and then you can never predict what they're going to do.
It probably feels that way to the opposition.
Right, but it's not. And that's what I really like about
chaos.
it. It's organized chaos because I think the key aspects of it are position switching and utilization of space. But when you talk about position switching, like a key example, you said right back to midfield. What you didn't say was right back to left midfield because it's a lot of...
It's a long way.
It's verticality of switching, right? Like right back can become a right winger, can become or right midfielder can become a right winger can become a right back, but you're sort of still in your same areas for the most part. Cruyff maybe does his own thing, but like that's the idea, is that because people can rotate along like vertical lines, it makes it really difficult to know who is going to pop up where and when, but it makes it easy for you, the team doing it, to know where you're supposed to be at any given moment.
Okay, and I called him the co-author.
Yeah.
Why did I do that, Taylor? I'm sure you know, because we've surely done the same research.
Because he was not just automatically the coach from day one at Ajax. He had a couple different coaches, but the one that you're alluding to would be Rinus Michels. Is that how we've agreed to pronounce it?
I think that's how you pronounce it. Rinus Michels.
Your people usually go Rinus Michels, and then I've heard like Renu Michel, and I don't know what to go with that.
Rinus Michels was the coach of Ajax in the late 60s, early 70s. They won the European Cup. They sort of started playing this incredible brand of football. Yeah. So the way I've heard it best described, and when I've seen it, I think this is the best way to describe it. Michels is the coach who's telling the team, play total football.
Yep.
Cruyff is the conductor on the field because some of that position switching is literally Cruyff telling people to go, you go here, you go there, right? He's conducting it on the field. And the great sort of line I read in, what was it called?
Neurotic Genius?
Yeah, it's called Brilliant Orange, the Neurotic Genius of Dutch Football by David Winner, is Michels was the coach, Cruyff was the conductor on the field, telling people where to go. And they obeyed because Cruyff was always right, right? He had a track record of proving that, like, hey, when I tell you to switch positions, some success comes from that. So everyone's just like, all right, I'll just do what Johan says.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
I know that's his perspective. I think some of the Ajax players would disagree,
well,
which maybe leads to why he doesn't end up playing there.
Eventually, you maybe wear at your welcome doing that. But to begin with, at least, this thing was super successful because Cruyff was conducting total football on the field with Michels coaching it from the sidelines. And then the famous 74 Dutch team, it's the same situation, right? It's Michels is the coach, Cruyff is the conductor.
Right. I want to go one layer down with the total football, though, because I think another way in which maybe the game changed him, which then allowed Cruyff to change the game further on down the road, is that Michels is this incredibly formative coach, as you said, starts in the 60s, is there till 71 when they win, I believe, their first European Cup. Then Michels goes to Barcelona, and Cruyff has a series of coaches like one year to the next.
Yeah.
And Michels, by all accounts, was this sort of like Pep Guardiola-esque drill sergeant. Everybody's got to know exactly what they're supposed to do, and it's really rigid. Cruyff likes that, but kind of hates it. He is not the most workaholic of players. And then he has a coach who's very laissez-faire, and that kind of works and kind of doesn't. Then he has another coach who's a bit more in between. But I say that just to say that even though they're still playing total football, he gets these experiences of like hands-off coach, hands-on coach, and in between, he gets like a Goldilocks situation. And I think that allows him to say...
He's the constant as well.
Yeah,
right?
But it allows him to then kind of look at that and think, I like this and I didn't like that, and I'm going to like kind of breed these approaches together and use that when I become a manager.
Yeah.
So that sort of total football experience, but through the lens of different managers at the same club, I think is another reason that he is able to change the game. All
right, I'm going to take us a little more trivial now.
Cool.
I'm going to say Johan Cruyff is the first player to wear an unorthodox non-1-11 jersey. When you picture Cruyff, you picture him wearing what number?
14.
Like, can you picture any famous player before that who was famous for wearing a non-1-11 jersey?
No.
Right?
Not even sure. It's mostly just nines. Yeah. I think of the number 9 is what I think of.
Pele wearing 10?
Yeah.
Right? There's no one else doing this that I know
Not
of.
so much.
So it all starts with an accident. So when Ajax are playing PSV, this is in 1970, Gerald Muren couldn't find his usual shirt, the number 7. So Cruyff offered up his usual shirt, the number 9. Cruyff was kind of a striker, right? So he wore the number 9. He gave Muren his number 9, said, hey, you wear this, I'll just grab something from this basket of shirts. He took one of the sub-shirts. It was number 14, right? Ajax won the game 1-0. Cruyff is kind of superstitious. Cruyff wants to keep wearing the number 14. That's how the number 14 became famous, and he became the first non-1-11 player that like popularized a non-1-11 number.
Do you think there's a decent chance that, given that it was the convention of 1-11 are your starters, that there was a little bit of a pushback? Like, no, you have to wear, like, you can wear that this time, it's an outlier, but next time you got to wear number 10.
The Dutch Football Association were not happy next game out when Cruyff wanted to wear 14. But here's one of the major things of the reason Cruyff.
And I guess you didn't care about that?
Yeah, Johan Cruyff. He tends to get his own way.
Yeah.
One, because he's like this, icon of a figure. And then he's just determined to get his own way. And the Dutch Football Association is not going to go against Cruyff for something that doesn't really matter all that much, right?
Yeah.
So he's able to bend those rules because he can bend an association to his will, at least on these small things.
Yeah, like one of my notes I have about him, and this goes to like another way I think he changed like world soccer, at least in my opinion, is that I get the impression that if you basically like tell him he can't play anymore because he's literally dead, he's going to like rise from the grave to play one more game. He does not enjoy being told what to do.
No.
And with that in mind, he is representative to me of one of the earliest examples of a player sort of asserting player power.
In my notes it says he basically invented player power.
Yeah. I mean, he really did. You've got like that jersey story. You've got the story about how he was sponsored by Puma, the Dutch sponsored by Adidas. He didn't want to wear the 3 stripes, so they had to custom make him a 2-stripe jersey.
Yep. So look at the 74 World Cup. You'll see all the Dutch team in 3 stripes, Cruyff wearing 2 stripes.
And that's like that is maybe like a slightly petty one because it's like, oh, he just didn't want to like betray a sponsor. But that was a very different relationship in the 60s and 70s.
Well, it's also because the sponsorship is individual versus the team sponsorship, and he wasn't gonna lose out on his sort of individualism.
Indeed. But then like extend that to when he's playing at Barcelona and he has a son, and they're like, oh, you can't use Catalan names. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to name my son the most Catalan name possible in Jordi. And then he has to to go back to the Netherlands to be able to do that, but he doesn't care because it's like, if you tell me I cannot do a thing, I'm going to do that thing. If you spite me, I will find a way to spite you back. And that isn't always my favorite quality in soccer players, when they're like sort of so obsessed with themselves and their brand and their ideas of soccer and how they're right. But I feel like that is a modern idea, whereas you look at soccer of the 70s, and he comes from like I think the Dutch FA was the second or maybe the last or second to last like big European organization to professionalize. He comes from that model, and then is able to sort of assert his authority and become this independent player and sort of get what he wants to get at a time when that was not common.
And here's the thing. If you go against him, he will get his vengeance.
Oh, yes.
Ajax found out. I actually can't remember what year it was.
Twice, I would say.
Was it? I want to focus on the Rotterdam incident.
Let's do it.
So is this 81?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so Ajax had won the league. Cruyff had been playing for Ajax. He wanted another contract. They didn't want to give him another contract.
They did not.
Maybe not at the money he was asking for, because he was towards the end of his career. And he said, okay,
83 is,
83,
yeah.
excuse me. He goes and signs with their rivals. Remember, he's Ajax through and through, right? Goes and signs for their rivals.
5 minutes walking from the stadium, I believe. Yeah,
goes and signs for Feyenoord Rotterdam,
the archest of arch rivals.
The archest of arch rivals. Yeah, it's all about Ajax is the cultural, educated city. Rotterdam is like the working class, blue collar, like port town, right? Yeah. Goes and plays for Rotterdam, wins the league with Rotterdam.
League and cup double. And is named Dutch Footballer of the Year the same season.
You don't cross Johan Cruyff. This is why people would do what he said, because they didn't want him to use his incredible powers to... It's like he would put a curse on you.
And maybe also had supernatural powers for himself, because one of the reasons Ajax didn't want to offer him that new contract is at that point he's getting old in years. They don't know how reliable he's going to be. They don't know how much they can rely on him for next season, and they want to bring through younger players. So he goes to Feyenoord, where he plays all but one game. He plays like every single game that next season to sort of, again, it sort of is like, oh, you're too old. Oh, I'm too old? Well, now I'm going to play every single game and beat you. Like, that is his mentality, and he somehow does it.
I've got one more. It's a positional one. I would argue he sort of invented the false 9 position. So I said earlier that before the 14, he was wearing the 9.
Yeah.
He really was a guy who was nominally a striker when you name the team, but he would wander off because he would want the ball a lot.
I mean, Exhibit A of this, which, forgive me if I'm stepping on your toes, I'm going to assume you were going to talk about the 1974 World Cup final, where
well, that's one of them, yeah.
He starts off as like the, maybe if not the center forward, one of the forwards, goes all the way back to midfield to get the ball off a center back, then dribbles all the way up the field and gets fouled in the box. Penalty to the Netherlands. They're up 1-0 in like the first 9 minutes. Yep. No, it's before the Germans even touch the ball.
Yep.
But yeah, definitive false 9 of leaving the forward line to go all the way back to get the ball and then coming all the way back up the field.
Do you have any more ways that Johan Cruyff changed soccer? We haven't really talked about his coaching stuff yet, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Do you want to get to that now, or do you want to get to something else
if
first?
There's more playing stuff, then I want to get to that. Otherwise, let's do our ad read.
I mean, I think I would say that, like, I talked earlier about how he came from an era in which there wasn't professionalism in Dutch soccer, and I think as a result, Dutch soccer was looked upon not really at all. It wasn't really seen. It was more like it's about England, it's about what Germany's doing, Italy, Spain.
That's why that 74 World Cup final appearance from the Netherlands was just shocking at the time.
But I think there's a reason, like the United States, the thing that we talked about a lot with Serginho Dest when he was trying to decide between the U.S. and the Netherlands is, like, technically the U.S. has been to more World Cups recently than the Dutch.
Yeah.
And yet I still have this idea that the Dutch are this world-class, elite-level soccer thinkers, and they will always find a way, and that comes from Johan Cruyff. Like, it really does. He establishes our modern understanding of Dutch soccer, and that has carried all the way through to present day, where in 2010, when they go to the World Cup final, he's rooting against them because they're not playing the right way.
They're playing Nigel de Jong, Mark van Bommel football.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Like, it's just that sort of idea that a player can sort of change the entire way a country's soccer is perceived is pretty amazing. Because, like, Maradona, an amazing soccer player, but we don't look at Argentina and say, like, oh, they're all the best dribblers in the world. We think of Maradona as...
a lot of number 10s.
They do, but they also produce their fair number of, like, great goal poachers and good center backs and quality central midfielders. Like, it's not this free-flowing, creative thinking, attacking player who's capable of anything.
Yeah. So you're saying he's the DNA of Dutch soccer?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Because he's the first figure after they professionalised.
You're saying that, and you're saying it more succinctly, and I like it, and I'm taking it. It's mine now.
Well, let's see if we can do the same with today's advertiser.
Sure.
Today's Soccer 101 is sponsored by ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is a VPN, and it's not just the most express one. I think it's the best one.
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain what a VPN is, Taylor?
Sure. It's essentially, I am not the technical person here, but I shall do my best. It essentially makes it seem as though your computer is connecting to the internet or operating from the country in which you need it to be so that you can access the services there. So if you want to watch Dutch Netflix, for example, you can use ExpressVPN to make it as though I believe your IP address is in the Netherlands. So then you get to watch Dutch Netflix.
I'm glad you mentioned Netflix. Netflix is a service that can sometimes tell if you're using a VPN. Certain VPNs don't know how to deal with that. ExpressVPN is one step ahead. Yeah. Much like Johan Cruyff, ExpressVPN is one step ahead of the opposition.
Yeah, and so if you do have a sort of journeyman career a la Johan Cruyff, where you're moving around to different countries and playing in different leagues at different times, it didn't really exist in the 1970s, nor was it quite as necessary. But today, if you want to stay connected to the pop culture of your homeland, of your country, where makes you feel a little bit less homesick maybe, you can use the VPN to be able to watch American television if you're a young American playing in Germany, for example.
Or the other way around, if you're an American in America and you want to experience some foreign culture like the BBC in the UK or German television or Dutch television, you can do that using the VPN. Yeah, including to watch a lot of soccer. It really does give you global access to all kinds of different soccer broadcasts.
And I would say also it's very simple because as we've
made it sound complicated. Like I'm sure it is complicated behind the scenes, but ExpressVPN makes it very simple. Don't you literally just click a button? You choose a country, then click a button that says connect.
Yes, and that's pretty much it, which is a really nice feature for if you're somebody like me who looks at weird it's not even a weird service, but to me things that you might download from the internet that's now I'm giving it access to my computer and it's telling where my IP address is. How could this be used against me? I'm very paranoid. I have my camera covered. I don't trust anything.
Oh, you one of those people?
But ExpressVPN, 100%.
I'll show you my camera.
My wife brought home a Google Home, and I was like, are you trying to bring down this house? Do you want to turn our property over to the Russians? Is that what you want? But with ExpressVPN, I don't have those concerns because it is so simple and easy to use that, nothing that betrays you is that simple. And I feel like ExpressVPN makes it very easy to essentially utilize what could be a very complex service.
The other thing is VPN can be used for your security, right? So your IP address is not your local IP address. It's the IP address from wherever you say you are. You want to say you're in the UK. That will be your IP address for when you go on the internet. So that it's an added layer of security. VPN, I believe, stands for Virtual Private Network.
I believe you are correct.
If our listeners would like to try it out, you can protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/soccer. That's expressvpn.com/soccer for 3 months free with a 1-year package.
You can visit expressvpn.com/soccer to learn more. Thank you very much to ExpressVPN for making me trust the internet a little bit more, even though I shouldn't, but very much appreciating their services and for sponsoring today's episode.
Making Soccer 101 possible.
Making Soccer 101 possible. That too. One more thing as a player, it kind of connects to the Cruyff turn, but that he... and is representative of him, in his entire career, player and manager, is just always looking for nuances and variations and loopholes to some extent.
Yes.
As an example, he was the one, I believe, who went for the passing a penalty kick instead of shooting it. And
he was the first to do it.
Yeah, and Barcelona tried that recently.
Why? It's partly because he just didn't like the idea of soccer being reduced to,
of course,
you kick the ball from 12 yards out when a referee blows a whistle and tells you when to kick it. This is him just wanting to show that things don't have to be done the way that people say it can be done.
This is also where, maybe it's because I like Cruyff, and so, I don't roll my eyes as hard as I did at, say, reading Maradona's biography when there's a lot of, and then I did this. It's you did not do that at that moment. You were not, choosing to go play for this team out of social justice and a sense of moral correctness. That is not what you were doing.
It's where you could get a contract.
I will say here, that does feel like Cruyff... just wanted to mess around or something. It was what if we do that? And then they did it. And then 5 years later, it was it didn't feel right morally and spiritually. It's okay, I understand that 5 years later, your opinion on this has changed. But in the moment, it was just kind of a cool thing to do.
So can you describe that penalty kick?
I mean, it's just you do it's like a disguised run up still, but then instead of shooting it, you just sort of lay it off laterally. And the idea is that I think
you have to go slightly forward, right?
I believe that's correct.
But only just.
Yeah. And so then, but if you disguise it enough, you kind of modern soccer would be that the goalkeeper is just kind of guessing the side, hopefully with some sort of nuanced information. So they're diving left, and if you sell it enough, then they've dive to their left, the goal's now open, the other player just comes through and like passes the ball home.
That's the key part, right?
Exactly,
After you touch the ball forward, you're the designated penalty kick taker.
Yep.
You just touch it forward a little bit, but you've essentially passed it to someone who can run from outside the area and runs onto a kind of through ball that you've laid off for them.
Yeah, and it also then creates...
It gets a confused goalkeeper.
And right, because even if the goalkeeper hasn't fully committed, hasn't like dived to one side, suddenly now they're like, oh, I guess I got to scramble to get the ball, and that pass can then come right back to Johan Cruyff, who can then just pass it home with no goalkeeper in there.
Are you ready to talk about Cruyff, the coach?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
I certainly am.
Here's my big pitch. I don't think many people would argue with this, actually. Johan Cruyff gave us the modern version of Barcelona.
Yes.
Including the famed La Masia.
Yes.
Yeah?
Agreed.
He is the absolute sort of architect of what the modern Barcelona looks like. This happens in two ways, right? As a player, when he left Ajax, he joined Barcelona in, I believe, 1973. They hadn't had a lot of success recently. They won the league the year he joined, including a 5-0 win over Real Madrid, right? So he's a big deal in Barcelona as a player. When he comes back as a coach in 1988, after 3 years of coaching Ajax and doing really well at Ajax, he revolutionizes the club.
Right.
He brings with him a style of play which is, one, it's total football. It's a commitment to possession and to passing, all that kind of stuff. And the biggest change that he makes, I believe, is he says, okay, this is the way the first team plays, but also this is how the B team's going to play, and this is how all the youth teams are going to play. And at La Masia, which is it's the name of the youth system at Barcelona, La Masia existed, but it was just like churning out youth players. And I think there's even a thing of like, you've got to be this tall to make the first team and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He completely got rid of all that. You start getting rondos, the 5v2, the keep away stuff.
Worth noting there.
Happens from the professional team all the way down to the youth team, so that you get these players who come through La Masia, who are schooled in the way of playing the way Cruyff thinks you should play football. That is how Barcelona still more or less play today. It's the way Guardiola played.
As far as I understand that he's the one who introduced rondos to Barcelona. Wow. I've read that in 2 different books, which blows my mind. Because
it's so associated with Barcelona now.
I mean, that Guardiola team that wins everything, that was how they would train. Like when they were doing their preseason tours in the U.S., you could go watch them train, but it was just a series of rondos the whole time because it's just lots of little touches in a confined space. It teaches you how to think quickly on your feet, and if you're doing that from top down, now suddenly, imagine a world where the training for a 13-year-old in Barcelona's academy is run a bunch of sprints, try to grow faster, I guess, put yourself on the rack and stretch yourself out, and then do a lot of rigid drills for a person like Cruyff who hated rigidity and you have to do this at this time, you have to do this at this time.
Yep.
He brings in this no, just play soccer, pass the ball. And it becomes, naturally, if you're used to rigidity and it has to be this way, and now it's just no, play essentially pick up soccer with your friends who are in your team. It makes it more fun. It brings about this kind of vibrancy that I think exists to this day in Barcelona.
Here's a stat. When Cruyff took over Barcelona in 1988, they'd won 2 league titles in 28 years. Can you imagine Barcelona for the next 28 years only winning 2 league titles? They are now at such a level of success. It all started when Johan Cruyff took over as head coach and absolutely revolutionized it. I used the word architect earlier.
Yeah.
Here's what Pep Guardiola says about Cruyff and Barcelona. Cruyff built the cathedral. Our job is to maintain and renovate it. Every coach since kind of is schooled in that Cruyff way of thinking. It's the Barcelona way of thinking.
And if you're thinking in terms of lineage, Guardiola is his heir, is his successor.
Yeah.
Pep Guardiola exists as he does today. Certainly his own work, but because of the influence of Johan Cruyff. Johan Cruyff moves him from a winger to a central midfielder, teaches him about how spatial awareness and the individuality and how you have to work with players, and that becomes the way Guardiola coaches. We've seen the clips. I talked with Bobby Warshaw about this, and he rolled his eyes at me because I was very much in love with Cruyff. But the way Pep Guardiola is in that clip with Raheem Sterling, where it's no, you've got to be here and you've got to be here at this time. That is who Cruyff was as a manager, and I say that to say that in and of itself was a very revolutionary way of doing it. Michael Cox in his book Zone of Marking has a whole thing about Van Gaal and Cruyff and how they were representative of the 2 ideas coming out of total football. Of Van Gaal was, no, you play the system. If you're a right winger, you stay on the right wing, you stay on that touchline. If you come inside, I will sell you. That is what he got rid of players who didn't fit the exact specifications and didn't play as a team. Whereas Cruyff was much more about managing the individuals to get the best out of them. That comes back to haunt him when he kind of loses the ability to control some of the egos that respond to that type of treatment. But that sort of individual level of coaching and training that we see from Pep Guardiola to Raheem Sterling and his players at Man City or Bayern Munich or Barcelona, that comes from Johan Cruyff establishing that as the operational policy.
And then you've got Spain winning the Euros, the World Cup, the Euros,
they did that.
2010, 2012. That is a very Barcelona-infused team, right? Those teams are the teams of Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, all of whom came through La Masia. Like that really, you see the influence now, not just throughout Dutch football, with Barcelona. And I feel like the era is sort of coming to an end now, but that Spanish dominance era when they won all those trophies, that's a very Cruyff influence thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still strange to me that there's not more success at national team level with the Dutch, but then that gets into, like, we talked about total football a lot and how that's all the Dutch were, but in reality, that Dutch team that is so successful in the Euros and to some extent at the World Cup is also like Feyenoord defenders being rigid and physical and knocking people off the ball, still buying into the system, but there are nuances within Dutch football that also factor in as well.
Okay, anything else in terms of like just bullet points of how Johan Cruyff changed soccer, or do you want to talk about Cruyff the personality, which I know is the other thing we wanted to do?
One more slight bullet point. We kind of touched on this already, but just the idea that he was a player who, again, at that time in that era, was not afraid to not stick to soccer. That he would publicly talked about how he would never play for Real Madrid because of their connection to Franco, who was still alive when he moved to Spain, and talked about naming his kid and how he kind of wouldn't.
He went all in on Catalonia.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, and I think so, and I think that connects to his idea of like social justice, and there are ways to be and there are ways not to be, and I like that idea, and I think with that in mind, like you've talked about how sort of British footballers in the 80s and early 90s, I ask you this all the time on the show, who's the one who like read the newspaper and so everybody was like, oh, this guy, what does he think he is? Like some academic?
Oh, this was Graham Lassalle because he read The Guardian.
Right, exactly. And I guess I think of it as like Johan Cruyff, meanwhile, like would be like smoking in the whirlpool afterwards, like reading a book of like philosophy. Like I think this idea of like, no, if you're a soccer player, you don't just play soccer, you also think about the world and operate within it.
That's why Dutch football is is perceived as sort of a more intellectual pursuit than most other football.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of amazing, again, given that it comes from like amateur background of you play with your local on a Sunday afternoon, to go from that to like, you know, reading a book on philosophy while scoring goals for Barcelona in the Champions League.
So let's talk about Cruyff, the personality, because there definitely is that we've talked about all these ideas he had and the things he did, and some of it's raw talent, right? If you can't do the Cruyff turn athletically the way that he can, like if he'd been just a thinker with no athletic ability, there'd kind of be nothing to him.
Yeah.
But there's also like a force of personality, and I want to talk about his personality essentially and where that came from.
The saying, never meet your heroes, which obviously we cannot because he has passed away, has never been more the case for me than with Johan Cruyff. I would never want to meet him.
Why is that?
Because I just... He strikes me as, from everything I've read, everything I've heard about him, as borderline talking about himself in the third person. And I think I can respect everything he did, but also recognize that he would probably be very difficult to get along with.
Here's a good example.
Captaincy?
I once gathered together some of the best quotes of Johan Cruyff. This was published for Paste magazine. And I think the one that kind of encapsulates that thing of like genius but infuriating is, before I make a mistake, I don't make that mistake.
Yeah.
He had
a few of those.
In a way, I can see the logic of that, but there's such an arrogance behind that as well.
Yeah.
I'd still want to meet him, but I could see how he could end up being dismissive in a way.
Yeah. I mean, but like, you look at where he comes from as well and his sort of background, and it does explain part of that, because he's
tell me about
born April 1947 in an Amsterdam.
Oh, you're not giving me a full biography, are you?
No, but he's born, April 1947 in Europe. Imagine the state of Amsterdam at the time.
Okay.
Like, bombed out buildings everywhere, still World War II rubble. So, but he's born 5 minutes from Ajax's stadium. His father dies when he's very, very young, and so he kind of has a surrogate father who becomes his stepfather, who's like the groundskeeper at Ajax. But he has an immense amount of hardship from an early age onward, and that kind of continues throughout his life. But I think because of that, it kind of hardens him to this idea of like, things have to be a certain way, or things don't have to be a certain way. I think in the end, they basically just have to be the way Cruyff wants them to be, because he grows up in this sort of like, you've got to make it yourself. So the only way you're going to find success is to make it happen yourself.
And so what about the idea that he's so his surrogate father was the groundsman at Ajax.
Yes.
He's also born 5 minutes from the stadium.
Yes.
There's definitely...
His mom was the housekeeper to Vic Buckingham, who was the manager of Ajax growing up. So he grew up with the manager's kids, basically.
I'm kind of... We talked about this off earlier, right? I'm getting vibes of Bill Gates. The way that Malcolm Gladwell describes Bill Gates in Outliers is that he's very fortunate in a way that he was in the right place at the right time, because he was in Washington. He was near the only computer that existed.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So there's a thing of like, his ideas were able to take hold at Ajax.
You're talking about Bill Gates there, not Johan Cruyff. Johan Cruyff was not in Washington growing up around computers.
No, but he was in Amsterdam growing up around Ajax.
Yes.
Right? And I think there's a similar thing.
And with that in mind, an Ajax like organization that historically embraced different ways of thinking, different ideas. If he grows up in the exact same conditions, but to your earlier point, in Rotterdam, he probably does not have that same level of like thinking about things differently, and we should always be striving for other things and other understandings.
Yeah,
so I think it's probably a time and place sort of situation. But then he also has just the iron-headedness that we've talked about already, the captaincy vote that has him leaving Ajax. Like it sort of sends you that idea that he's this integral figure, he's this like the focal point of the Dutch and Ajax teams, and yet simultaneously a captaincy vote doesn't go his way, and he's like, you know what, I'm done with it, I'm out of here. Like that's not the kind
That's when he leaves for Barcelona.
So he still has that temperamental disposition that you sort of have to have, that goes like part and parcel with being this like it's my way or the highway. And also, if it's not my way, I'm going to be like throw my toys out the pram and leave.
So what else have you got? What else do you want to talk about in terms of Cruyff's personality?
Well, I think like a couple things really quickly. One of them, like he takes over Barcelona at the time when they are, as you said, at their all-time low. I think they sacked 15 players and Luis Aragonés, the manager, the season prior. And so
there's a bit of a rebellion, right? It's called like there's something...
The Hesperia mutiny.
There we go, yeah.
It's basically the players didn't want to pay more tax than they were supposed to. They thought the public would back them. The public did not. And so it turned everything against Barcelona. That Cruyff kind of comes in. It is sort of a like, oh, he's able to turn it around, and it's amazing, and it's how good of a coach he is. But I think in line with what we've been talking about, it's also the case that if you're taking over a Barcelona team that are literally at their lowest point, like I think they were 15 points behind Real Madrid with like 2 months to go in the season, like it is sort of the unique opportunity to be like, okay, we are categorically not doing things right. So if you have ideas about how to do things differently, by all means do them. And so he kind of walks into a situation that is tailor-made for him to change this massive club at a time when they needed it. At other times, he probably doesn't have that freedom.
This is maybe right place, right time.
That's what I'm saying. There are definitely those elements to it. Yeah.
I've just realized one thing we didn't talk about was his influence on Ajax, the soccer team. Because obviously Barcelona is the bigger example, but Ajax is a massive football team as well, right? The way that Ajax bring through youth now and the way that they play soccer... Like it's almost there's a reason that Barcelona and Ajax play very similar styles of soccer.
Another Cruyff quote would be, "I've never seen a bag of money score a goal." I think it is. Like, so
but
to your point,
you can copy and paste everything we said about Cruyff at Barcelona, and he built the cathedral, we just maintain and renovate it, and it's all that is true of Ajax, just with a slightly smaller budget.
Yes, and like Van Gaal would not love this because Van Gaal, I think, to this day, does not really like Johan Cruyff. But like that Van Gaal Ajax team that goes on to win the Champions League in 94 was it?
95.
I think 95. Like that team exists because of the like Ajax DNA blueprint that was established with Cruyff as a player, with Mikkels as a coach.
Oh, okay. There is so much we could talk about with Cruyff. Have you got anything else that you really want to hit on? I know it's kind of tempting to just get everything you've ever heard about Cruyff into one show.
I have a weird what if for you that I'm sort of like, I don't know if this will be as interesting as I think it was when I wrote it down, but because Cruyff, he steps away from the game because of heart issues, and essentially that's when he stops coaching. But there was talk about him taking over the Dutch squad in 1994 for the World Cup. That doesn't end up happening. But I look at that as like Captain Ronald Koeman, who Johan Cruyff coached at Barcelona. You've got Ajax traditional players, Frank de Boer, Ronald de Boer, Mark Overmars, Edwin van der Sar, Peter van Vossen, all come through the Ajax system. And then there were 5 players that were the core of Cruyff's team: Dennis Bergkamp, Frank Rijkaard, Danny Blind, Vichy, and Bosman. So I look at that Dutch squad, and it's suddenly like all of these players who were like taught their entire career to revere Johan Cruyff, to play the system that Johan Cruyff wanted. And I do wonder if he manages the Netherlands in the 94 World Cup. Do they find a way through? Does he lead them to a World Cup victory, or does that completely tarnish his reputation?
It is strange that he never coached the Dutch national team, right? Yeah. And I always thought that like he doesn't see it this way, by the way, but there's still this like tragedy at the heart of Dutch football is they played this incredible like blows everyone's minds way of playing soccer in 1974, get to the World Cup final, score that goal after a couple of minutes where Germany don't even touch the ball and they win a penalty and score. They're 1-0 up. And there's all these stories of how, like, we thought we'd won it and we were just going to coast and almost embarrass the Germans, taunt the Germans, a little bit of payback for invading us in World War II, kind of. They end up losing the game 2-1 to West Germany. And they've never won the World Cup. And it's almost like that was the original heartbreak of Dutch soccer that had driven them crazy ever since. Yeah. And I always thought that, like, wouldn't it have been great for Cruyff? Because then Cruyff then, for still unknown reasons, doesn't go to the 78 World Cup. There's all kinds of rumours why, right?
Well, yes, but I think there's one that's kind of the truth.
Okay,
right?
You tell me the truth.
His family were kidnapped, or there was a kidnapping attempt.
A kidnap threat against his wife.
Yeah, right? And basically, or I think, yes. And so I think basically that's what led him to not want to go, is that happened, I think like after they had qualified, like he was in qualifying, and then he decided I'm not going. And the narrative that he has said, I think in recent history, is basically I didn't feel comfortable leaving my family because there was a risk that could happen. Okay. And so I stayed home. And then it became...
I'm willing to accept that then.
Yeah, and then it got turned into, at the time, like, he didn't want to support the military junta in Argentina, and there was all those kind of narratives. But I kind of believe the kidnapping story a little bit.
Okay, but anyway, he doesn't get another shot at the World Cup.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. I always thought there would have been a nice, balance to him eventually coaching the Dutch team at the World Cup. It would have been a glorious, glorious story, but unfortunately it doesn't happen.
It might have been, but this is the fade away or burn out. There's also a chance that instead of, I think they go on to lose in the 94 World Cup 3-2 to Brazil in the quarters, there's also a chance that it implodes and he doesn't make it out of the group, and then suddenly we're like, well, but then when he did manage the Dutch, it wasn't that good. Mm-hmm. But then maybe we have our answer of, can his philosophy work at national team level? Maybe we have a definitive answer right there.
I mean, so it worked with Michels in 74, right? He came in not long before the World Cup and kind of taught them all how to play his style.
Yeah.
Well, they did have a lot of Ajax players there.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Right, anything else before we don't want to fade away. We do not. We want to go out with a bang.
One very brief thing is I think because we've talked about him as this sort of arrogant figure, this global headline attracting figure, you do have to have sort of tragedy to balance it out a little bit, to explain some of it. We've talked about a little bit with his father passing away, with the kidnapping attempt against his family. There's also the story that I guess he had planned to retire at the age of 30 or 31. He had entrusted, I think it was his brother-in-law, it might have been somebody else, with his entire fortune.
There was a Dane Cook situation.
Yes, and it was all... Yes, I know what you mean, and it works very well. Where basically all of his life savings are squandered, so then he has to, and that's when he does the...
That's why he's in NASL, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I'll go around and make some money because I have to. And so, but that extends his career, which is good.
That might sort of be part of the rationale behind the Feyenoord situation.
Oh yeah, I think it absolutely is. It's I've got to make this happen. But so he has all this success, but then he has these moments of tragedy that I think make him a more compelling character, as opposed to this just sort of everything worked out for him and he's not that interesting.
Okay, so there we go. Mm-hmm. How Johan Cruyff changed soccer. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Soccer 101. There's a whole feed of Soccer 101 episodes. Soccer 101 episodes. We encourage you to scroll up and down and choose any episode you like. If you've never heard us before, we also have the Total Soccer Show, which goes 5 days a week. It's much more news and match reviews and reaction. We encourage you to listen to the Total Soccer Show as well. Also, we love iTunes reviews.
We do.
Give us an iTunes review or Apple Podcast review. Help us spread the word about Soccer 101.
Nice iTunes reviews. We like nice iTunes reviews.
Yes, those are the best ones.
Not stick to soccer iTunes
Give us 14 stars, if you can, in honor of Johan Cruyff. Or 1 + 4. Give us 5.
I mean 15. Yeah. I'd like 15. That's fine. I don't need 14.
All right. I've been Darryl Grove.
I've been Taylor Rockwell.
Thank you for listening to Soccer 101.